Have you ever felt like there are these invisible forces almost, these deep mental habits maybe, that just seem to keep us stuck?
Yeah, things you might not even really be aware of consciously.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But they're there, shaping our thoughts, our actions, maybe keeping us from feeling truly free.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today, we're taking a deep dive into that very idea. We're looking at an ancient text, the Mahāmāluṅkyovādasuttaṃ.
A really fascinating one.
It offers quite a profound look at these kinds of hindrances. Our mission really is to unpack what this sutta calls the 5 lower fetters.
The pañcorambhāgiyāni saññojanāni in Pali.
Right. Why did they matter so much back then in ancient spiritual practice?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more surprisingly, why are they still so relevant for us, today?
That's the key question.
We're going to break these down and look at the very detailed path the text gives for actually abandoning them.
And what's great about this sutta, this Mahāmāluṅkyovādasuttaṃ, is that it's not just theory. It's presented as a real conversation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're sort of transported to Savatthi, the Blessed One, the Bhagavan, is talking with his monks.
Okay.
It kicks off with this really illuminating exchange between him and a monk named Māluṅkyaputta. And later, Ananda gets involved, too.
So it feels immediate.
Exactly. It tells you right away this is meant to be a practical guide. It's about, actual transformation.
That context is really helpful. So, okay, the sutta opens, and Bhagavan asks the monks, basically, do you remember these 5 lower fetters?
Mm-hmm.
And Māluṅkyaputta steps up, sounds pretty confident.
He does, initially.
And he lists them out. He says, number 1, self-identity view, sakkaya-ditthi.
Mm-hmm.
2, doubt, vicikicca. 3, sticking to rites and rituals, silabbata paramasa.
Right.
4, sensual desire, kamacchanda.
Mm-hmm.
And 5, ill will, bhayāpada.
The standard list seems straightforward enough.
Yeah, sounds pretty comprehensive, doesn't it?
It does, and this is where it gets really interesting, really deep. Bhagavan immediately challenges Māluṅkyaputta's understanding. He doesn't say the list is wrong exactly, but he questions the depth of understanding.
How does he do that?
He uses this quite surprising example. He talks about a young child, the Dahara Kumara, a baby, basically weak, lying on its back.
A baby? What does that have to do with these complex fetters?
Well, that's the point. Bhagavan says, look, this young child doesn't really possess these things in a developed way. A baby isn't wrestling with, complex philosophical views of self-identity.
Right, of course not.
Or harboring deliberate, sustained ill will. It might cry out of discomfort, but it's not the same as bhayāpada. Sensual desire isn't there in the same adult sense either.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Exactly. The crucial insight he's pointing to is that these aren't just surface-level views or active desires. They are deep-seated underlying tendencies.
The anusaya.
Precisely, the anusaya. They lie dormant within us, sort of waiting to be activated by circumstances.
So they're potential, not just actuality.
Yes. And Bhagavan points out, if you only define them as the active things, well, critics could easily poke holes in the teaching. They could say, well, a child doesn't have these, so your teaching is flawed.
Okay. That protects the teaching from superficial criticism.
It does, and it highlights the depth. This distinction between the active manifestation and the latent tendency is, it's subtle, but incredibly important. These aren't just passing thoughts. They're like deep grooves in the mind.
Wow, okay. That's a powerful clarification right there at the start. It's not just what we think or feel right now, but the potential, the underlying structure.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ananda, seeing that maybe things need a bit more spelling out,
He senses the importance, yeah.
he steps in and basically asks Bhagavan to elaborate. He says something like, it's time for the Blessed One to really teach about these 5 lower fetters.
Setting the stage perfectly.
Yeah, it moves us from just a list to a proper deep dive into what they really are and presumably what to do about them.
Exactly. And that leads into this really useful contrast the sutta draws between 2 kinds of people, the uninstructed worldling, the asuttava puthujjano.
Right, this sort of everyday person without this specific training.
Yes. And the noble disciple, the Arya Savako, who has heard and understood the teaching.
And this contrast helps you see the different ways you can relate to these fetters, these bonds. So what's the key difference the sutta points out?
It really boils down to understanding and how the mind engages with them. For the uninstructed worldling, their mind lives preoccupied by the fetters. It's actually overcome by them.
So they're kind of running the show.
Pretty much. And crucially, this person doesn't truly understand how to escape. maybe doesn't even see escape as possible or doesn't know the method.
Right.
And because of that lack of understanding, the lack of the right practice, these fetters become strong and unremoved. The Pali is thamagata apiyata.
Strong and unremoved. That sounds formidable.
It is. They're deeply rooted, resilient. The person feels stuck, basically.
Okay, so that's the worldling. What about the noble disciple?
It's the opposite picture. Their mind does not live preoccupied or overcome by the fetters. They might still arise initially, but they don't take over. Because, critically, they do understand how to escape. They know the path, the practice.
They have the key.
You could say that, and the result. For the noble disciple, these fetters, and this is important, along with their underlying tendencies, the anusaya.
The root system.
Yes. They are abandoned, sanusaya. They're let go of, completely uprooted, which obviously leads to a profound sense of freedom.
That's a really stark contrast. So thinking about this for us, for you listening, what does this really mean? Is just being aware of these patterns enough to change them?
Well, that's what the sutta suggests, isn't it? Mere awareness, just knowing about, say, your self-identity view or your tendency towards doubt, it isn't sufficient on its own.
It doesn't automatically make it disappear.
No. True understanding involves knowing how to find release. Knowing the actual practical steps for their abandonment. That's the crucial difference.
It's like seeing the chains versus knowing how to unlock them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without that practical understanding, that the underlying tendencies, the anusaya, they just remain strong, unremoved.
Right. And the text is really emphatic about this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That abandoning these things, these fetters, it doesn't just happen by accident. It's not wishful thinking.
Not at all.
It requires a very specific path or practice.
Mm-hmm.
The Sutta uses the words magga and payapa.
Mm-hmm.
It's an active process.
Absolutely. It's not passive. And the Sutta uses some really powerful analogies to hammer this point home. Makes it very vivid.
Like what?
Well, there's the tree analogy. Imagine a huge, strong tree. Solid.
Okay.
The text says, if you want to get to the heartwood, the core, the really valuable part.
Yeah, the strong inner wood.
Right. You can't just wish for it. You absolutely have to remove the outer bark first and then the layer underneath, the splint wood. There are steps you cannot skip.
Makes sense.
In the same way, the Sutta says it's impossible to truly know, see, or abandon these 5 lower fetters without engaging in the proper path, the proper practice. You can't bypass the work.
The implication is...
But with that path, with that practice, it is possible. Definitely possible.
That's hopeful. And there's another one.
Yes, the Ganga River analogy. Really evocative. Picture the Ganges River, mighty, full, deep, flowing fast.
Okay, powerful image.
Now imagine a weak person trying to swim across this river. No help, no boat. Their mind, the text says, does not incline, is not settled, is not freed towards the goal, which is described here as the cessation of self-identity.
So their mind isn't really committed or focused?
Right. And the result, they fail. They can't cross. The current is too strong. Their effort isn't rightly directed.
And the contrast.
Then along comes a strong person.
Mm-hmm.
Their mind does incline. It is settled. It is freed towards that goal. They have the right mental state, the right focus, the right energy. They can cross successfully. It powerfully illustrates that you need the right mental attitude, the right direction, and the sustained effort, the practice to overcome these powerful currents of the fetters.
That image of the strong swimmer really lands. It feels like it's saying, this isn't just about wanting it. It's about active, intentional training, a real commitment to the method.
Precisely. It's not just helpful. The Sutta frames it as absolutely necessary. You can't just wish these deep habits away. You have to actively cultivate the mind.
Okay, so the need for a specific path is crystal clear. Does the sutta then actually, lay out what that path is?
It absolutely does. It doesn't just say you need a path and leave you hanging. It outlines the specific maggo, the specific paipada.
This is where the practical instructions come in.
Exactly. This is the core of the how-to. It details a progression through profound meditative states. These states are the means by which those fetters and their underlying tendencies get weakened and eventually eradicated.
So what are these states?
It starts with the 4 jhānas, the form absorptions, and it's crucial to understand these aren't just about feeling calm or relaxed, though that happens. They are states of deep mental purification and, very importantly, penetrating insight.
Okay, the first jhana.
In the first jhana, you enter a state secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states of mind. There's initial and sustained application of mind onto the meditation object, and it's accompanied by rapture and pleasure born from that seclusion.
Sounds pleasant, but how does that tackle the fetters?
Here's the key practice within the jhana. It's not just about enjoying the state. While in it, or reflecting upon it, you are guided to actively perceive all conditioned phenomena. Your body, form, your feelings, perceptions, your mental formations, even consciousness itself, you see them clearly as impermanent, suffering, a disease, a boil, a dart, alien, disintegrating, empty, non-self.
Wow, that's a radical reframing.
It is, and doing that directly undermines things like sensual desire, kamanta. How can you cling desperately to something you see as inherently unstable and ultimately stressful? It also cuts at ill will, baipada, why react with such aversion to things perceived this way. And it chips away at self-identity view, sakayati.
Because you're seeing the components of self as impersonal processes.
Exactly. You're deconstructing the illusion. Then you move deeper.
To the second jhana.
Yes. In the second jhana, that initial and sustained mental application fades away. The mind becomes internally assured, unified, calmer still. Rapture and pleasure are still there, but born now of concentration itself. This deeper calm makes it even harder for things like doubt, vicikicca, or agitation linked to ill will to gain any foothold.
Okay, getting quieter, deeper.
Then the third jhana. Here, even the intense feeling of rapture fades. The meditator abides with equanimity, mindful and clearly comprehending, experiencing a more subtle pleasure with the body. This detachment from even intense pleasure further weakens sensual desire and cultivates profound balance.
And so forth.
The fourth jhana is the peak of these form absorptions. Both pleasure and pain are abandoned entirely. Even the subtle physical pleasure of the third jhana is gone. What remains is pure, refined equanimity and mindfulness, completely untroubled.
That sounds incredibly profound.
It is. And this state of utter equanimity is seen as directly counteracting the subtlest forms of self-identity view. There's no I clinging to pleasure or pushing away pain. It also makes adherence to rites and rituals, silabata paramasa, seem completely irrelevant because the purification comes from this inner state, not external acts.
So the jhanas provide the refined mental state and the insight needed to cut the fetters.
Precisely. But the path described in this sutta goes even further.
Beyond the jhanas.
Yes, into the immaterial attainments, the arupadhanas. These deal with even more subtle objects of mind. The text details the first three.
Okay.
First, the base of the infinitude of space, akasananyayatana. You transcend all perceptions of form, physical contact, diversity. The mind expands into limitless space. This further dismantles any lingering attachment to a solid self identified with the body or form.
Wow.
Then, second, the base of the infinitude of consciousness, viññāyatana. Transcending infinite space, awareness rests on infinite consciousness itself, again pushing the boundaries of conventional self-perception.
And the third one mentioned.
Third, the base of nothingness, akiññikanyatana. Going beyond even infinite consciousness, the mind focuses on sheer absence, on nothingness. This profoundly undermines clinging to any object, however subtle, further eroding the foundations of the fetters. The sutta implies the next step too, neither perception nor non-perception, but focuses on these as the path.
This is an incredibly deep and subtle path.
It really is, and the sutta states the outcome clearly. For those who fully traverse this path,
Yes.
they attain the destruction of the effluents, the asavakaya. The effluents asavas are those deep-seated mental pollutants. Sensual craving, craving for existence, wrong views, ignorance. They're intimately tied to the fetter's underlying tendencies. Destroying them means full liberation, nibbana.
Complete freedom.
Yes, but, and this is a really specific and quite unique detail in this sutta.
Oh.
For those who practice this path diligently but don't reach full nibbana, the final destruction of effluence in this life.
Okay, what happens to them?
The text says they become an upapattika. That means they are spontaneously reborn, not through a womb, but directly into a high heavenly realm, a pure abode. And they attain final nibbana there in that realm. They never return from that world. It guarantees liberation, even if it's completed after this life ends. It's a very strong assurance tied to this specific practice.
That's fascinating. A guaranteed path one way or another if followed.
That's the implication, yes.
Okay, that's a truly comprehensive picture of the path and its results. But then right at the end, Ananda brings up one more really interesting point.
He does, a very insightful question.
He asks, basically, if this is the path, this detailed progression we've just discussed, then why is it that some practitioners achieve what's called liberation of mind, citta vimutti, while others achieve liberation by wisdom, paññā vimutti?
good question, right? If the method is the same, why does the result seem to manifest in slightly different ways or with different emphasis?
Exactly. What's Bhagavan's answer?
It's incredibly concise, almost cryptic, but profound, he says. Difference in faculties. Indriyavimatata.
Difference in faculties. What does that mean?
Well, it suggests that even though the path, the Magga, provides the framework, the actual journey and the way liberation is experienced or emphasized can vary based on the individual's inherent strengths, their predispositions, their particular mental faculties or capacities like faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom.
So people might lean more towards the deep peace aspect, mind liberation, or the deep insight aspect, wisdom liberation, based on their own sort of makeup.
That seems to be the implication. The path works, but our unique constitution shapes the precise flavor, you might say, of the final attainment. It's not a totally uniform outcome, even with the uniform method.
That adds a really interesting layer of personal nuance to the whole process.
It does. It acknowledges individual differences even at the highest levels of practice.
Wow. Okay, so we've really journeyed through the Mahāmāluṅkyovādasuttaṃ today. We started with those 5 lower fetters.
Sakadihi, Vicikicca, Salabharaparamasa, Kamachanda, Bapada.
Right. Self-identity view, doubt, rites rituals, sensual desire, ill will. We saw why they're so tough, because they're these underlying tendencies, the anusaya.
Not just surface thoughts.
Exactly. And then we discovered this incredibly detailed step-by-step path the sutta lays out for actually abandoning them.
Through the jhānas, the deep absorptions.
And into the immaterial attainments, a path that directly targets those roots.
Leading ultimately to the destruction of the effluence and liberation.
The remarkable roadmap.
It truly is. And maybe, as you're listening and reflecting on all this, that final point about difference in faculties, the indriyavimatata, is something to consider.
How so?
Well, that idea isn't just relevant to ancient monks, is it? It applies to anyone trying to learn or master anything complex in any field.
Sure.
What does it mean for your own unique strengths, your learning style, your way of approaching challenges? How might understanding your own particular faculties, your own predispositions, how might that help you navigate your path? Whether it's a path to deep understanding in your work, or maybe a release from whatever mental burdens or patterns feel like your fetters?
That's a great question to leave people with. Thinking about your own unique way of engaging with challenges and growth. So we really invite you to reflect on that. How might these ancient insights, this detailed path, and even this idea of individual faculties apply to your own quest for clarity, for freedom from whatever holds you back?